He was the police commissioner of the city of New York from 1994 through 96, the police chief of Los Angeles from 2002 to 2009, and he's currently the chairman of Altegrity, a global security company and parent of Kroll. Joining me by telephone from Washington is William Bratton, who was kind enough to phone in following a board meeting. Commissioner, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Sir, let's get your first reaction to the news that we all heard last night about the death of Osama bin Laden.
Well, needless to say, like the rest of America, it was very satisfying to hear that he's finally been brought to justice. It's a moral victory, it's a psychological victory, and it's one that will have great impact.
Commissioner Bratton, you were in charge of the New York Police Department in the years following the first World Trade Center attack. That happened in the winter of 1993. Tell us about what security was like in that city then and how it was ramped up, and secondarily, what it means to the economy of a city to have to implement such counterterrorism measures.
Well, I was commissioner starting in 1994 with Rudy Giuliani. I was not commissioner at the time of the first World Trade Center bombing. Commissioner Ray Kelly was in charge at that time. But to give you a sense of the difference between then and post 9/11, during my time as police commissioner, I spent very little time, very little time, on terrorism-related matters. We work very closely with the FBI and other agencies, Joint Terrorism Task Force. But during my 2 years as commissioner, after the arrests and the solving of the first World Trade Center bombing, in some respects, I think we figured it was over. And we did not have a full appreciation of al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in terms of what they were up to and what they were working on.
Well, Commissioner, if I might ask then, sir, if you didn't have a full appreciation, would that be because perhaps maybe some authorities believed that the first World Trade Center bombing was in fact an aberration and it wasn't the ramp up of something that might be a little bit more sinister?
That's correct, because if you recall, at that time, that was one of the few times in which an actual terrorist act had been committed in the United States, especially one that was seen as having some foreign influence within the borders of the United States. We certainly had a number of incidents earlier on, the Oklahoma City bombing, but that was homegrown, if you will, terrorists. So I think the sense was that we had made arrests, and this was in fact an aberration, and that having learned from it would be better prepared to deal with it. And back then, the overall responsibility for external threats rested with the CIA and the FBI. In cities like New York and Los Angeles, you had a Joint Terrorism Task Force, but they were really driven and led by the feds.
Right.
Post 9/11, Commissioner Kelly in New York and myself in L.A., as local police chiefs, recognized that the feds were not going to be able to do it all. So we really grew our counter-terrorism capabilities. We certainly worked very actively in task forces, but we had independent capabilities that we were developing also. New York, certainly, because of the multiple threats and attacks against New York,
right,
has the best in the nation.
Commissioner, again, but the economic angle to this, how thin does that stretch a police force to realize that you have to use more manpower and more financial resources on counterterrorism efforts as opposed to, say, local efforts for crime and such?
Well, after 9/11, the nature of crime in the United States changed because for the first time, really, local police were going to have to basically take on the role of dealing with terrorism-related concerns. The expression that Homeland Security is really hometown security.
Right.
Commissioner Kelly certainly embraced it. I embraced it. Many of my colleagues in policing embraced it. And we are much better prepared. There's no doubt, however, with the stresses on policing today, the economic stresses, many departments reducing resources, New York and L.A.'s sensitivity, Washington, D.C.'s sensitivity to this issue is not shared by most police departments around the country because they're dealing with what they know, which is crime rates that are happening now in their cities, murders, rapes, and robberies. And the threat of terrorism does seem to be focused primarily on the larger major cities.
William Bratton, he's the former police chief of New York, joining us on the phone from Washington. Commissioner, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay, pleasure to be with you. All the best. Bye-bye.